Hi, I'm Mayor Jim Darling, and this is Meeting with the Mayor. We have Vicente Gonzalez, our Congressman from District 15.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
You're McAllen's Congressman, along with Donna and Weslaco, and then you go all the way up to Seguin.
Yeah,
almost.
I do have Edinburgh as well. I have 8 counties in my district, so I have Hidalgo, Brooks, Jim Hogg, Duval, Karnes, Live Oak. I have a slice of Wilson County, and almost all of Guadalupe County too. It's a 270-mile long district, north to south.
You know, when Doggett was our congressman, I used to always go to Austin a lot, and I'd always say it feels so good never to leave my congressional district and fly 320 miles.
Right.
And do that. How do you do that? I noticed there's some drought issue, and in fact, you passed a resolution or trying to seek some funding.
That's
for
right.
that.
We got some funding for
Duval
areas.
and
Yeah, it's so far Jim Hogg and Brooks. Duval hasn't qualified yet, but they probably will. So they do, the way they do it, the National Weather Service comes out and checks for droughts. They don't just gather water. They actually go into the ground and monitor the water table. So right now I have like the adjoining county saying, hey, why aren't we getting the same funding? And the fact is that their water table is higher than their neighbor's water table, so they don't quite qualify. That may change, in a month or two.
And that's kind of a challenge for you. I mean, I like those people up in Seguin, but it's just different being on the border than Seguin.
It is.
Better border issues and different issues from that
standpoint.
It is.
In fact, years ago, we took a poll on different issues that are important to people in our district. And oddly enough, border security was like 4th or 5th in Hidalgo County. And it ranked 2nd to somebody who was 270 miles away from us. So yeah, I don't think they know quite South Texas or the border. Things change certainly up there, and their issues are different than ours, and they're more oil and gas reliant and tourism. Here I think it's more trade and farming and agriculture and that type of economy.
Tourism a little bit, yeah.
Tourism, yeah.
Yeah, it's really, in Region M, I'm on the Region M board, and they define a drought for our area in Region M's water planning group. The states separate it in the length of time between when the reservoirs are full. And they're talking about Amistad and Falcon, which are international reservoirs, and they are fed primarily by about 80% by Mexican water. So we're thinking, how is that define a drought? But anyways, that's how they do that. So it's in one area they just dig into the ground and see how deep the moisture is, and in our area it's reservoirs. And
that's how they monitor ours, right?
Completely different. I know you've been involved a little bit even in that with the treaty between the United States and Mexico and supplying the water. They have to give us 350,000 acre-feet a year over a 5-year period, and that's always been an issue for the irrigators here of when and how Mexico.
Right. Yeah, sometimes they had a huge water debt. Right now they're all paid up, so I think for the past few years they've been doing a good job in keeping up with their obligations.
They've never missed it in 5 years, but they kind of wait. Every 5 years we have a pretty good storm, tropical storm, or whatever. Usually it comes into Mexico, sometimes on our side, but mostly in Mexico. So boom, they get to catch up. With
right,
that's
kind of the way it works.
So that's a kind of an interesting thing. But it is a challenge to be. I mean, many congressmen have that challenge where they have a wide 290-mile district, and we have a hard enough time making sure people in North McAllen are satisfied.
Just recently, I went and visited the northern border with Congressman Colin Peterson in Minnesota, which is quite interesting. And he also has a 350-mile long district. But part of his district is on the other side of the Canadian border, because just kind of the way Minnesota is. And then when they drew the line between Canada and the United States, a portion of his district, you have to drive through. So we had to go through Canadian customs to get to the other side of his district. Kind of like if we had to go through Reynosa to get to another part of my district. So quite interesting. But yeah, they have their own different border issues.
Sure, it's like, well, Anzadúas Park goes north of, there's
several
miles.
So they mentioned that to me.
Several miles north of the Mexican border, where you can be south of
within our territory, right? Or on this side of the river.
We have somebody from Canada. We have the Border Trade Alliance, and of course it's Mexico and the Canadian border. But it's interesting on the Canadian border, there's pressure from Canada to build more bridges because they want to keep that commerce flowing, and not so much on the American side from that standpoint. But USMCA is going to be important for all three countries, and I know you're a proponent of the USMCA adoption.
I have been. I have my issue, obviously, the security issue with Mexico that we've been talking about. And in March of this year, I flew to Mexico City to meet with the Secretary of Public Security, and because my concern is the road from Monterrey, Mexico to our...
The way we refer down here is the autopista.
The autopista,
Yeah,
and then that 5-kilometer
right,
area from when you get out of the autopista to the border, because there's many incidents there. In fact, the governor of Tamaulipas was in my office last week, and I had to have that conversation with him about I would like to create a green zone like we had in Iraq and Afghanistan, from here to Monterrey, to where you could tell people, here's a map, and as long as you stay within this area, we can assure your safety. And tell the bad guys that if you go into this zone, really bad things are going to happen to you, because that it's got to be the message we send. And under this new pilot program, so I got them to agree to put Highway 40 into this new pilot program on secure roads. And there'll be, every 20 kilometers, there'll be a station with this new federal police that's been implemented. But the only issue with that is we're now 6 months into it, and I haven't seen much movement. So that's why last week I penned a letter to both the Secretary Durazo, and our ambassador, who's a great lady, telling them that if they've been lobbying me really aggressively for this new USMCA, and I'm like, well, if you want my vote, I need you to secure this trade route, because if we talk taxes and tariffs, I don't see how we can't talk security in the same conversation, because we have farmers, we have a lot of importers who are having to pay an extra cost for security to get their product to the border, and I don't see how that's not a tax or a tariff. You don't have that extra security cost on our side, and I think it's a good negotiation piece, even when we're talking trade. But I'm putting a little more pressure just for that highway, that they've assured that it's going to happen. So now I want to see action. I want to see timelines. I want to see the plan implemented, and I just talked about.
Well, that's vitally important to McAllen. You phrased it right. It's a trade route. 40% of our sales tax comes from Mexican nationals, and a lot of it from Monterrey. And the issue has always been Monterrey's in Nuevo Leon, and of course Reynosa's in Tamaulipas. Yeah. And the governor of Leon says, well, why would I facilitate my people going shopping in McAllen? In fact, he actually said that one time. So the federal government's really the one that has to provide that security, because I don't think the states are going to either have the wherewithal or are going to have the cooperation to necessarily do that. So that's really important.
Yes, so the governor of Cabeza de Vaca from Tamaulipas apparently is implementing this new program. He's got some American consultants, ex-federal agents that are helping him. I hope it works. He claims that it has, so maybe it has, but they're still on the list with the State Department as a do not travel right. area. So until I see any changes there, I'm going to certainly be careful.
Well, my wife always gets on me because when I go to the mall, I look at license plates, and I look for Tamaulipas and Nuevo Leon license plates. The more Nuevo Leon, the better.
Right.
Tamaulipas is certainly welcome and great, but that shows that that's working. Really
right,
appreciate
that they're
your
coming,
effort.
right?
Yeah, and the USMCA is, one was security, and the other has been labor union issues. But I think with AMLO as the president, is certainly a pro-labor person, the Democrats shouldn't have too much of a problem with that from that standpoint.
Right. They're just concerned. In fact, one of the issues is that they want to make sure that these are legitimate labor unions in Mexico, and not just some sham union that comes up with an agreement and they try to get it through on the Mexican side. This is AFL-CIO's version in Washington, what they're telling us.
I don't want to talk too much about it, but General Motors is struck, and one of the issues is some of the compliance of the union with what they're supposed to be doing. That's always been an issue in the United States. I don't think Mexico's any exception to those kind of things that happen in the union. We told them in Washington, Nancy Pelosi's people, that even the chiclet sellers on the bridge are unionized in Mexico, so they have a lot more union membership.
Yeah,
than
the
we do.
taxis are unionized. A lot of them are, and they're very political, but it's a different, certainly a different system than what our labor unions are here in the U.S.
And I think the third thing is environmental. And when we deal with river issues, the Mexican side is pretty concerned about environmental issues. I know when we brought down some of the bugs, or moss or whatever, to kill the plants in the river and everything, that they were very, very careful about that.
Runoffs?
So, yeah. And so I think, it's kind of a double-edged sword when you're dealing with Mexico. I think the major concern was what's happening in the Gulf, but there's a lot of companies that drill in the Gulf that are not necessarily Mexican companies authorized. I don't know how all that works, but hopefully that can get resolved. I think
Right.
USMCA
Clearly I feel confident that it will. They claim they're working on some side deals. I know one of them is my road, which is not a side deal, just something they need to do to get my vote. But they're actually having side deals that are in writing, and I quite don't understand that because they've already voted on this agreement in Mexico and in Canada.
Well, the tomato growers, for instance, out of Florida, that was a big issue, and
Right.
I think
The citrus growers.
Yeah, the fear was if the tomato guys got their way, then everybody else, we'd have the citrus growers, and everybody else would be jumping on that bandwagon, trying to cut their own deal, and really have a USMCA that's fractured into
Right.
many,
It's
many
not
parts.
just a clean trade agreement. When I was in Mexico City, we had some members, especially from Florida, that were trying to get a seasonal agreement on imports for citrus growers, which also impacts here our district. But they were real quick to say, if y'all want to do seasonal only on citrus, well then we are also going to do seasonal only on barley and apples and soy and other products. So the idea is either it's going to be free trade or it's not going to be free trade. It's going to be just a negotiated deal.
And people wonder what's seasonal, the young people especially, I guess anybody under 50. Because when I was growing up, you could only buy apples one time a year
Right,
and everything
yeah,
else, and now it's all times a year, so trade is much more involved in produce than it ever has been because of
You get any product all year long because it's grown in different regions.
And I think, ultimately tariffs are paid by the consumer ultimately. I mean,
That's right.
I know they're trying to bring negotiations, the president's using that to negotiate, but ultimately it's paid by the consumer.
Yeah, the cost will be passed on.
So when we get this thing done, the better, I guess, we'll better
I think
off
so.
we'll be. And I think this area is going to benefit much more with the 40% at the higher labor costs and everything. So you're going to, and 40% would have to be done over here, I think. And so we're going to see a lot more parts manufacturers with assembly still being done in Mexico.
Right. Now you're talking about the automotive components.
Right.
They went from 62.5% requirement to 75%.
Right.
So I think that should help. Also, the hourly wage has to come up to $16 an hour, which
Right.
is pretty good pay in Mexico. And
And full benefits too. Or
in
whatever
full
it is.
benefits.
Yeah.
I selfishly thought, well, maybe we can get some of those maquilas and Reynosa to come across at $16 an hour. That's not a bad paying job, and it may be worth it for them to just be on our side of the border.
Especially with logistics on just-in-time manufacturing, less time you have to worry about bridge weights or, I don't know how they do it. I mean, I think some of that's moving from China away just because you think about it. I'm trying to manufacture, and I got to get something from China through ports in LA or Mexico up to this factory, and if I don't get them, that factory closes down. So I think there's going to be pressure to have more manufacturing here in the United States because of that.
I hope we can keep it here in our area.
Now we're talking about, how about gun control and gun violence? That was, you made
Do I
some
have to talk
comments
about that?
No, you don't have to talk about that. That's a tough situation.
It is. It's a very tough situation, especially in Texas, even South Texas. We grew up hunting and fishing, and I collect guns, and but I am for strict background checks. I went and bought a shotgun the other day at the gun show in town, and I was shocked.
You didn't have your congressional button?
No,
on?
I didn't. I was wearing blue jeans that day, but I was shocked how easy it was. It was like buying a hammer at a hardware store.
Yeah.
They literally, it was a used gun. We negotiated a price. I give them the money. They ask for my driver's license. They look at my driver's license. They hand it right back, and they give me the gun.
Yeah.
And I was expecting that I was gonna have to fill out a form at the minimum, I knew it was easy because I had heard it was easier, but I figured at the minimum there would be some type of form, there'd be some kind of record. There's nothing. And you could buy, just the way I bought that shotgun, I could have bought an AK-47 or AR-15 or any kind of weapon on the market.
And the gun lobby says, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people, and you know that's true. And so, but when you try to say, well, we need to regulate background checks and those things, one of the things in Texas, I think, is we have almost every school has their own police department, and there's no requirement for the police department to share information with the city police department. And I think there's things you could do
Things
to
like that
change
need to change?
Putting psychologists in school. My group, where I try to say, what would prevent you from telling somebody you think this kid's dangerous, and your fellow classmates? And they had a lot of reasons, and it was, we need to make sure we empower those. Maybe make it illegal for, not that you're responsible for the killing, but if you know your son's got erratic behavior, he has guns, and you don't, or he has illegal guns, or a relative, you ought to have, especially if it's your child or grandchild or whatever.
Right.
You ought to have the obligation to report that somehow, make that.
I agree. I mean, I've thought even, that if a psychiatrist has a patient that has a problem, I mean, that now you get into HIPAA regulations and all kinds of other issues. But we're talking about that in Washington, and it's a very controversial issue. And they think that would prevent people from wanting to go to a doctor and get mental health care. So that's the other side of the coin. But things that we should all be able to agree on is background checks, private cells. Like this was a private cell, even though it was at a gun show. The person that I purchased my shotgun from was not a gun dealer, so she just went and rented a table and sold her guns. It was a lady and sold me the gun just like selling anything at a flea market. I think that should be regulated. I think limiting magazine capacity.
Yeah, I was in the service, and an M16 had a 20 round, but that was for combat purposes. Right.
So we just passed a bill in committee, in the Judiciary Committee, that limits magazine capacity to 10. It more intense background checks, more information sharing between agencies. That's on that bill, and then the private cell loophole. So those three issues, I think, should be easy. But I thought limiting magazine capacity is something everybody should agree on. It's not. I mean, there's a huge pushback.
Yeah, I think it's an idea of the camel's nose getting in the tent, and as soon as you say you can regulate them, then you can regulate the type of weapon.
That's the way they think, right? Yeah.
That's the way they think. So they just don't want it to.
Another issue that I think we need to figure out is what's happening in American society today that's greatly impacted these mass murders that we're seeing. I mean, these same guns were out in the hands of private citizens in the 80s, 90s, maybe 70s. AK-47s were privately owned. How did we get here socially to where every month, or less than every month, we have another one of these mass murders across the country? Some people say, well, the way these, and then there's different theories, and I'm not saying any one of them are right, but one of them is they think these young kids that are playing all these games and killing 200 soldiers on their television or their video games are insensitized, and they say we do that to the Marines when we send them into war. That's the way part of the training. And I mean, this is a whole idea that's never. I don't think we've looked into it in great depth, but something's going on socially besides the availability of guns that I think we should probably look at.
I think even in Europe, you're seeing where it's more terrorist, where that's the motivation, and
right.
That's what you're used to. And I think New Zealand may be an exception. A guy shot up at church, but yeah, the rest of the world's not at the same level as we are. There's that kind of activity, but it is more terrorist, where it's political, and this is just psychotic.
Right.
It's just
Somebody loses their mind
and
hard
to find.
Goes into Walmart. What happened in El Paso was really tragic because that was incited. Not only by a psychotic individual, but it was incited by racism.
Right.
And that really struck a nerve with me, because that could have been South Texas. That could have been the Valley.
Yeah, it could have just gone down.
This guy could have driven
281 instead.
Straight down to McAllen, Texas, but chose to drive to El Paso. And we have this tragic situation that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and there's things that happen locally that don't necessarily make the news, where we've, I think, probably been lucky in a lot of situations where we've prevented something from happening before it got bigger.
We have,
It's just, it's really a serious situation that needs, problem is it got very political. You know, I mean,
Yep.
they raise a lot of money, they're a powerful lobby.
They raise a lot of money, they give a lot of money to members. They will go into a district if they have an unsupportive member and find an opponent for him and help fund him. So it's a very aggressive group that pushes their agenda very aggressively. When I first got to Washington, I thought that even they would agree to I didn't know how extreme they were, to this minimizing magazine capacity. Boy, they about threw me out the room when I mentioned that. And that was 3 years ago. Now it's become a very serious conversation, so much that now we've passed legislation out of committee. We'll probably see it on the floor in the next month. The issue now is, will it get stuck on Mitch McConnell's desk in the Senate? And he already has some good legislation. He has a background, it's called the SAFE Act, a background check bill that's a good bill that passed the House and has been sitting on his desk, for almost a year now.
Well, and the problem they say with that is, okay, so you'll outlaw this future sale. What do? You make everybody turn them in, and if you do that, can you make them turn their guns in and all that?
It's clearly complicated.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
complicated.
so we had a guy out of California, typical, right, that was saying, well, if you don't turn them in, then you go to jail for not turning them in.
Yeah.
And
Well, the magazine aren't killing people. It's the people that are killing
That's
people.
right.
And it goes back to that argument. But they should. But it's licensing or registering. Everybody is they're opposed to that too. So there's got to be some answer, because it's pretty scary out there.
it is. It is.
Especially.
So that's something that I think we're going to have to come to terms with. And even if you're a gun collector the way I am, or I like to hunt every once in a while, you've got to figure we can't continue having these incidences around the country, even if it means maybe losing a gun that I have in my collection for the safety of the greater good. And I think that sacrifice for a lot of gun owners may come sooner rather than later. From the way I see it pushed, now I'm starting to see, folks from some conservative red states agreeing with some of these ideas. You may be opposed to guns forever until something happens in your hometown or in your district. And we had and also members who have these tragic situations and don't act are losing their seats. We had a 20-year member of Congress in Orlando who had remember after that incident,
Right.
and 5 days later he took money from the NRA, and he was challenged by a friend of mine, Stephanie Murphy, who now took a seat. Some young lady who challenged him like 3 or 4 months before Election Day, and because of that situation, they figured if he's that insensitive, even though we know him and like him and he's been there for 20 years, if after the tragic massacre that occurred in Orlando, he could take a check from the NRA, he shouldn't be a member of Congress. And this is a Republican seat.
It's kind of something that's changed over the years. Is there's more do or die issues. Now, immigration's one. I think just saying, well, it's not a crisis on the border. I've said it's a crisis a lot of places, but not in our city. Trying to explain it. And boy, I've gotten hate mail.
Oh, maybe
for
I
that.
do too.
And I thought, okay, it's a complicated situation. It's not necessarily you're on this side or that side. And it seems like more and more in this country, I think because of the media.
It is, especially with what we're dealing with here in our community.
Yeah.
I filed a bill, Henry, and Phil did, to ask for, and it's not popular in a lot of areas around the country. It wasn't popular with the Hispanic caucus, but our bill asked for asylum seekers to be able to ask for asylum in their home country and set up immigration courts and embassies around the world where people can go. And I think most of the evidence and witnesses to prove up your asylum claim are probably in your home country.
Exactly.
And have
And
immigration.
timely, too. You're not waiting 5 years to
Right.
have a case. Yeah.
And prove up your case, and if you qualify, you get a document, you're able to get on an airplane and fly into the United States for $350, because from what I hear, most of these
6,000.
Yes, 6,000. We made a conservative calculation, and we came out with, they were paying $580 million a month to these cartels or whoever it is that's
More money than drug money.
Yeah, more than drug money. I think it's a bigger business right now than drug money. Now, this last month, migration is down 56%. people.
Some nights we only had one person. We don't have anybody overnight.
Isn't that something?
In our respite center, yeah.
So I'm glad to see that. You know,
Yes.
Certainly it was an issue, and I think Mexico played a part of it, and also I think the extreme heat. There's a cycle every year, and during the hottest period of the year, the migration slows down. But I don't think it would have slowed down from what we had to 56% with some of the effort that's been happening in Mexico.
Yeah, and I was never, there's a lot of issues on there. I thought letting somebody in the United States and waiting for 5 years at a hearing, and maybe then they have a family, et cetera, and they're not going to show up. And so you've not done them a favor because you've driven them to the underground. You've not done the United States a favor because you have undocumented people and that population's growing, and nobody's solving the immigration issue.
And I think we need a labor program for labor migration, where they can come in as guest workers for a year or two, and after maybe 5 years they can ask for a green card. With programs like that, people don't bring their family, their wife and their kids, and a lot of these folks don't want to move here permanently. They're just here to earn a living, gather some savings, and go back to their home country. I think we need to figure that out, because all these thousands, tens of thousands of people showing up immediately get absorbed into the economy. So clearly we have a labor shortage. If you talk to the agriculture community, they tell you we don't have enough people to harvest our ag products.
Last year, the shrimp industry only had 60% because they didn't have people working.
Exactly. The U.S. Home builders are in my office all the time saying we really need an immigration bill. These are conservative Republican groups that are really pushing for some type of immigration relief.
And I think instead of, the president said merit, and that certainly makes sense, but it's really on need.
Yes.
In merit, because merit implies you want rocket sciences, scientists and all
right.
that, but it's really based on
somebody's
need.
Somebody's got to pick the fruit, and only little hands can do that. Now, also, I believe that we should be investing in Central America and Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras.
There's a Northern Triangle proposal.
There is.
That it's not gotten much.
No, they allocated, Joe Biden worked on that. He allocated, I think, $700 million, but very little of it has trickled down to the right places. And it hasn't been impactful. But we need to bring security on the ground and prop up their economies to incentivize them to want to stay home.
Well, I think we solved a lot of the country's problems with your interview today, and it's been very interesting. I know you're very busy, and you always spend time in McAllen and in your district, so we appreciate what you do.
Thank you for having
Congressman.
me.
Thank
it's
you.
always a pleasure.
And this has been your City of McAllen Meeting with the Mayor. Thank you.